If you think about now a film where Eddie Murphy plays several roles within a film, now that's looked on as almost a sign of dreadful.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I mean, he plays the characters in The Barbershop and Randy Watson from Sexual Chocolate. He plays these characters, and my younger brother, who is in his mid-20s, had never seen this film.
Right.
And he watched it and he loved it. And I think that is a 5. I will sit down and defend this film to the death, purely for how funny it is. There are flaws with it. I know it's not perfect. I love it. And I think there's enough there for pretty much anyone.
Hello, film fans. Joining Flixwatcher in the studio today, we have Rich.
Hello.
Ben.
Hey.
And as always, Kobe.
Hello.
And we're reviewing Coming to America. Thank you, as always, to the mighty people for the mighty, mighty tunes. And thanks to Ben from Rockwood Audio for his awesome editing skills.
Please do remember to write a review and rate us on Apple Podcasts, anywhere you can do where you listen to the podcast, because it really does help us.
And you can join in the conversation with us on Twitter
at FlixWatcherPod and on Instagram
at Flixwatcher. Hello and welcome to this episode of Flixwatcher Podcast. Joining us today, we have Ben and Rich. If you would like to say hello to our listeners and tell them a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Hello, my name's Rich Nelson. I do the Betamax Video Club podcast, all about 80s films, and this is one of my favourites.
It's one of your favourite ones. And we'll get to why you chose it, certainly, but is Eddie Murphy, does he loom large in your 80s catalogue?
Yes, I think everything of his 80s run was pretty much high up there in my favourite list. Obviously, anything after probably this was hit and miss, mostly miss. But I think his run of 48 Hours, Beverly Hills Cop, Trading Places, and pretty much everything up to this was pretty much solid gold.
And I was going to say, do you ever have to explain what Betamax is to anyone? Because obviously it's a very long gone term.
It is, and luckily most of the people who listen to it are old enough to remember.
I never had a Betamax. I knew they existed.
What's the other one?
VHS.
That's it.
Yeah.
Come on.
The one that everyone has.
Well, I was like trying to remember what the other one was, and I was like, oh, and I thought it was too obvious. But yeah, that was American, wasn't it? Betamax was more the American one.
No, they're both Betamax was Sony, but they were both competing. They both had different things about them, but mainly porn.
That's what it comes down. It was the same with Blu-ray and HD.
Mainly porn brought VHS, but also when Betamax first came out, it had a limited run of like 60 minutes. VHS starts off at 90, so already had an advantage in terms of time, so it just made it easier for people to record more stuff. And then when they started releasing films on VHS, it just made it like easier. Obviously, Betamax got better, but yeah. Anyway, so
I never realised you had such a phenomenal knowledge of analog porn.
Betamax VHS.
And who are you? You're the fourth voice.
Hi guys, I'm Ben. I run at Top Film Tip on Twitter, where twice a day I put out synopsis of the most interesting films on TV, on British TV, free to air. So, for instance, for Coming to America, my tip would be Despondent with Affluenza and Ennui. Callow African prince seeks woman of worth in unforgiving New York neighborhood. Astute fish out of water comedy Coming to America.
So Coming to America, as we said, Rich, was your choice. Can you tell us why you chose it and give us a 1-minute synopsis?
Well, I think this was one of the films that I remember, and again, watching it when I was probably far younger than the certificate suggested.
Shall we how old are we here, guys? I'm 40. I've just turned 40.
I just turned 40.
I'm 40 in a couple of months.
Okay, so we're in the 40s club in the 80s. So we're all in the,
except for Helen, who is always 21.
Well, you're 21 when you're born. We were all single digits in the 80s. Is my point. So we were watching these films when we shouldn't have been watching these films.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So. And again, watching this, even as a young man growing up in sort of North London, everything about this film was hilarious to me for various reasons. Watching it as an adult now, and at the point where I'm married with kids, and it's everything from the fact that this centres around a young prince who's basically betrothed into an arranged marriage and decides that he needs to go and find his own princess, and the adventure that he goes on with his I suppose, best friend with slightly ulterior motives, and going to, I suppose, the randomly chosen Queens in New York, which I'd never been to at the time, but the way it's portrayed in comparison to the African paradise that he's grown up in. And there is the element of fish out of water there, and there is also the element that he finds a woman that he's attracted to and very much on the verge of love, but has to pretend he's someone he's not in order to find out that, she doesn't love him for who he is. Or, sorry, she does love him for who he is and not purely because of his background or access to funds or anything like that. So there's a lot of threads throughout the film, and they're all hilarious.
So what's the synopsis?
So Akeem, he turns 21. He's due to meet his wife-to-be, decides that he's going to go to America, meet someone that he actually loves, because he doesn't want to meet someone who's been essentially bred to serve his every whim, which is part of his country's supposed tradition. And he finds a woman who he loves, who they work in a very closely related to McDonald's. He takes a low-paid job there with his friend, and they live in a really slummy apartment block in a really grotty part of New York, and basically woos her away from her very sleazy rich boyfriend by being a really nice guy. And all the while, his best friend and manservant tries to convince him otherwise, and that he hates it and he needs to go back to really where he's from and where comfort is.
Helen, what are your thoughts on coming to America?
So I've remembered seeing this lots in my childhood, and I was surprised that it's actually a 15. I assumed it was a bit lower, but
you thought lower than a 15?
Well, I kind of assumed the fact that I was allowed to watch it and watch it multiple times at an age that was, as we've already said, not even into the double digits. I just kind of assumed, but on rewatching it, there's quite a lot of boobs in it, and it's pretty sweary, which you'd expect from Eddie Murphy in America during the 80s. I think rewatching it, I was surprised that it's aged pretty well. I did wonder how well it was going to have aged. And there's something quite sweet about Eddie Murphy, who writes this story about a guy who doesn't want to end up marrying a beautiful woman who is there to serve him, and he actually wants to go out and find true love and true connection. So there's something quite sweet about that. And Nile Rodgers is on the soundtrack there. You've got loads of amazing 80s outfits as well. So I quite enjoyed rewatching this, having not seen it for probably a good 20 years or something.
Oh wow, okay. Ben?
I was expecting this to have not stood up very well.
Yeah, you did say that when I sent you the choice. You were like, "Oof, let's see how this plays out."
I think we live in a what you might be what could be described as a very socially conservative time in some regards, and people find offence in places that perhaps they didn't used to find offence, and I was expecting this film to perhaps not sit so well today. As it turns out, I think it was very deft. It was well. It's a really well constructed film. It feels a bit slower and baggier than you might expect a comedy these days to feel. I think it's almost 2 hours or 150. I think this would be a 90-minute film. It would be a bit tighter now.
Well, it depends on who's helming it. If it was Paul Feig or Jones, it'll be even longer.
Interesting. Landis wanted to chop quite a bit out of it and would have chopped it down. He felt it was a bit too slow. So if there had been a director's cut, then he would have
made it tighter.
Yeah.
Because I think this is a rom-com, and I think the thrust of them getting to know each other takes a fair bit of the time, doesn't it? So we'll talk about this a bit later on, I guess, but I feel the time was there, but maybe take out 10 minutes or so, but wouldn't have taken out half an hour.
I would.
Sorry, Ben.
Yeah, so I think to its credit, it's got a lot going for it. The one thing I'd say, I remember watching this as a child and quite enjoying it, I guess. It didn't really make me laugh. It was interesting and
what, as a child or now? It didn't make
now.
Okay.
The character moments. Eddie Murphy. I mean, he's a incredible character actor, and with his friend Arsenio Hall, all that stuff between those guys is fantastic. I found that the actual love interest, it twists a few things. So one thing that's quite interesting is there's a sort of trope in film called Born Sexy Yesterday. So you think about Fifth Element. You've got this gorgeous, beautiful woman, but she's too innocent to know that maybe Bruce Willis is just too old and ugly for her.
Yeah.
And so she's available sexually, and that becomes interesting to the audience that there's this beautiful woman who's too innocent to know that she shouldn't really be available to people like us watching the film. In this, it kind of twists it. So you actually have him play that character. He has the innocence. He doesn't know. He's the man who is on the surface very, appealing to women, not just for his looks, but for his wealth and his position. And he comes to America naive, fish out water, and that's really, really interesting take on things. Even today, that would be an interesting twist round. And I can't think of anything else. It doesn't come to mind where there's a similar thing at play.
Typically, it is the female role, but I think I was really kind of taken back by, you still don't have this kind of film. Yeah. From the male perspective.
And also the other thing I found is I watched a few YouTube videos on this and some interviews, some more recent, like last sort of 5 years or so interviews with Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall. And what's interesting is this was essentially an all-black cast in the 80s, and it was blockbuster worldwide. Like it's the only film with a black lead that ever did well in Japan, and Japan's a big market. It's twice as big as the UK, for instance. And it isn't. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. It's not thought of as a black film. It is a popular comedy film from the 80s. Just happens to have an all-black cast. And again, like today, you think of the fanfare around Black Panther, which is also about an African prince with loads and loads of wealth that people don't really know who he is. But there was a whole big to-do about that film because it was a predominantly all-black cast. And you look back 30 years and you've got this film essentially doing the same thing, playing really well, making big money. So, there's lots of points of interest from a filmmaking point of view.
I mean, it's just such the star power of Eddie Murphy at that time. And he was I think he was 24 when he made this film, which is obscene and I'm amazed that he did this. But this is as Rich said, first film, 48 hours. He was superstar on Saturday Night Live. Then it was Trading Places and Beverly Hills Cop. So he was one of the few actors that was kind of pulled into the studio system. Like, we need to hold on to this guy, dude, what do you want to do? We'll give you carte blanche. And he's like, well, I've got this idea. And they're like, yes, we'll do it because you're Eddie Murphy and you're one of the quickest, brainiest wits.
So not wanting to talk over again and again, but on the interview I was watching today, that was the first question, how did you come up with this idea, Eddie? And he was saying that him and it might have even been Arsenio Hall, I think they were doing like a stand-up tour and they were just going around America in clubs and places doing their thing, and he was finding it really difficult to find. He was single and he wanted to find a special lady friend, if you want to use the parlance of our times.
That was Eddie Murphy's main vice, by the way. He didn't drink or drugs. It was ladies.
Even now.
And what he found is that he couldn't. People knew who he was. People knew he was wealthy, and he had absolutely no idea if a woman was interested in him because of who he is or what he had. And therein is the premise, is the essentially the whole point of this film.
So Eddie Murphy, for you guys, what were your thoughts of him then and nowish?
I think this was probably and again with the 80s bias, and other than the odd sort of outlier in I think it was a Bowfinger and films like that came a little bit later on. This was
so not Daddy's Daycare.
No, and certainly not the Doolittle films or anything like that. But this was, to me, his last film that I loved, the last almost great film of his. The first three that we mentioned, they were. Imagine having that on your CV as your first three movies.
And where'd you go from there?
Yeah, and even this, he's managed to pull this off. I mean, yes, he's got John Landis directing, who's got form for some of the best comedies. But he does this, and this was also one where, if you think about now, a film where Eddie Murphy plays several roles within a film, now that's looked on as almost a sign of dreadful.
Yeah.
Whereas this, I mean, he plays the characters in The Barbershop and Randy Watson from Sexual Chocolate. He plays these characters, and they're funny. They're not too much because he knows at this point keep them down to virtually cameos.
Yeah.
this isn't Norbit or the Clumps or anything like the Nutty Professor. And again, it works so well. He's not full sort of turned up to 11 Eddie Murphy. He actually keeps
he's actually quite reserved.
Lid on it.
His performance really is so straight throughout, and it's everyone else who reacts around him. And I mean, I didn't know awful lot about Arsenio Hall at the time, and I think it was another film I looked at once, I'm Gonna Get You Sucker, the sort of blaxploitation parody, and a lot of the cast of that had been related to the Arsenio Hall show, which in this country hardly anyone knows anything about, but it was such a giant in America in the 80s. And again, this is virtually all I know him for, and yet he's out for the sequel as well.
Looking forward to the sequel? What are your thoughts on Eddie Murphy, Helen?
So, yeah, I mean, Beverly Hills Cop for me and this were kind of the Eddie Murphy that I knew and grew up with. And then, yeah, I mean, I'm not interested in any of the Nutty Professor or anything where he dons a fat suit. But I did enjoy Bowfinger, which you mentioned. I thought that was good. So, yeah. So I don't really know that much about the sequel other than it's been said there is one.
It's in production.
It's in production. And for me, I don't know if I'm interested in a sequel for this. When I heard, as a counterpoint, when I heard there was a sequel...
Is he coming back to America?
It's coming to America. Number 2 America.
When I heard there's a sequel to Bill and Ted, I was like, oh, actually, I can see that. I'm interested in seeing that.
No, you weren't. You were excellent.
Yeah, sure, I did that. But for this, I was like, I'd like to see how it plays out. I hope Eddie does really well in it. Because I always every time you see him, and you get this with other actors, Will Smith being another one, just like, dude, come on, you're better than this. You are better than this.
Can you do this? It's a good film.
Did anybody see Dolomite Is My Name?
Dolomite is fantastic.
Because it was, again, that didn't strike me as a cinematic experience. It was a bit long and a bit, it didn't feel big and have the cinematic scope, but that was a really interesting film, and he was fantastic.
And that Dolomite is the main thing that's kind of making me think, well, coming to America could be quite good. And also, I mean, outside of that, like I said, Bowfinger and Dreamgirls was the other film where he was quite good. But yeah, it's been like Eddie.
It's quite a big gap.
My first question when I heard about the sequel was just why. He can't need the money, and the premise, I believe, is that he has a son. And again, this is, the film should expand on this, but he has a son. But at what point does he have the son? Is it during the marriage? We know this film ends up with him marrying the girl at the end. Or did he do something that we didn't see in this film? Probably not. So we have to find out, where is this son who is the Prince of Zamunda?
Well, we can think about the sequel. I guess it's kind of sidetracking, but it's interesting. There's another one coming. But I mean, we had other big cast members here. James Earl Jones.
Well, the biggest surprise for me, and having seen it as a child. Cuba, where was Cuba?
He was getting his haircut.
Cuba was the first guy getting his haircut.
He?
Yeah.
Amazing. Sam Jackson.
Yes.
Boom. That was amazing. Yeah. I was just thrilled to see Sam in there, and he was like 80% Pulp Fiction Sam at that point.
And also Frankie Faison, who plays Burrell in The Wire.
And also Eric LaSalle as well from
ER.
With glorious hair.
That Samuel L. Jackson scene, going back to what you said, Helen, about being allowed to watch this, I think we probably all saw a sanitized version of this. We saw it that's taken off ITV, and this is certainly how I watched it. It was recorded from the TV, and they'd overdubbed it.
I saw it with "Forget You."
Yeah, so that's it. So Samuel L. Jackson was "Forget You," and that me and my brother for the longest time thought A, that was a real line, and B, thought it was the funniest line in the entire world.
Yeah.
So when I first saw A at the start, I think they cut out that your raw penis is clean, Your Highness.
No, that's always been in it.
No, I'm telling you what I've seen.
Yeah, but that's the line that we all thought, me and my brother thought was the funniest thing ever.
No, but I'm saying in the versions I saw, that scene just wasn't in
it. You cheated.
Yeah, but I'm telling you what I see.
There's a lot of boobs at the beginning of this film.
And then that "Forget You" line was a scene that was like in the version that we had on videotape, which is recorded, was "Forget You." And when I saw it for the first time, A, with the boobs, B, with the "fuck you," was like, oh, this is a different
You were
film.
robbed as a child of
I mean, it's just
inappropriate language.
I don't think they do that much now, though, do they? They don't tend to overdub films anymore on
You can
TV.
find stuff on the internet if you want.
No, but I mean, even they recently released a version of RoboCop on Blu-ray that includes as an extra the sanitized version of RoboCop.
Really?
So it has the release for TV with. I mean, it doesn't
muddy funsters.
It cuts none of the violence out, none of
which is
the
weird,
blood.
isn't it?
Yeah, but there's no swearing.
I mean, what's interesting, I don't know when the last time you saw Back to the Future, but I mean that was a mainstay of my childhood, one of my all-time favorite films. I'm very hesitant to watch that with my children. I really want to, but there's lots and lots and lots of swearing in that film.
There is. There's more, and there's some ones that your kids will take away and use elsewhere as well.
Yeah.
Things were different in the 80s with the PG. Who else is in this? Yeah, I mean, I love Samuel Jackson in this.
John Amos.
John Amos.
I suppose the father-in-law, Mr. McDowell.
Yeah.
And I guess I knew him from either this or he was one of the villains in Die Hard 2.
Right.
But again, these are guys that you see in a lot of movies around that time, sort of late 80s, early 90s.
Character actors, jobbing actors.
And when I guess seeing this now as well, versus seeing it when you were a kid, there's so many more things that you kind of take away from it. Like that whole kind of, no, we're not like McDonald's. They have the golden arches, we have the golden M, whatever, and they have the Big Mac, we have the Big Mick. At the time, I just thought, dude, shut up. But then there's such a kind of a running thread through this film to the point where my biggest laugh this time round was him like looking at the McDonald's rule book and like someone coming in the office and him chucking it away, because I wouldn't have noticed that kind of stuff. So I think it's very, very kind of layered film.
I massively appreciated Eddie Murphy's barbershop thing, especially Saul.
Oh. Yeah. That banter between those four guys.
And in the interviews on YouTube, you can see him getting made up. I think they got a makeup expert in. Even now, looking at videos of the guy doing the makeup without the cinematic lighting and so on, of Eddie Murphy being a old Jewish guy, it's astonishing. It's really world class. Yeah. And they were saying that he, when he got made up, he went out and he was like in character flirting with the ladies on set. They got the producer down, and John Landis was like, "Oh, meet Saul," and he's like, "Hi, why am I talking to this guy?" And, like he had like face to face, inches away, he had no idea who he was. It was really, really impressive.
And like you say, but when you hear about Eddie Murphy doing Norbit or the Clumps, you just think, and also Martin Lawrence and all those knobheads that do it, you just think, for fuck's sake, guys, there is just better. But this is that one time. Maybe there's another time when it's just like perfect. Him playing the Saul, him playing the main barber, Arsenio Hall playing the other guy.
He plays the Reverend, doesn't he?
Yeah, Arsenio plays the Reverend, and then he plays the sexual chocolate guy.
Yeah, and Arsenio Hall plays one of the women in the bar. I mean, it's clearly
just
him.
Yeah.
In drag.
There's no effort there.
Yeah, there's no effort there.
And it's him hitting on both of them, really.
So it's a good film. It's a good film. It was better than I thought. It stood up well. For context, I think some of you know, I watched Soul Man on Amazon Prime last night. That is a uncomfortable watch today. By comparison, that this does hit a lot of marks and it lands better than I expected. There were a few holes. There were a few problems I found. I have no idea what his love interest, Lisa sees in her boyfriend, who is a greedy coward with no apparent redeeming features or character traits whatsoever.
I kind of always made out that it was her dad was like, this guy, he's the guy for you, and she kind of stomached
that they were together,
right? He has to be like a bad guy as well, because Eddie Murphy has to be the righteous one. So it's just kind of like it's written.
When he says if you want to get a nice American girl, you go for a daddy, and that's how he's gone for it. He gives his dad the tickets for the football games.
But it's not like his dad's trying to encourage her to get with this guy. Like, they're together. They're an item, right? Or did I completely misunderstand?
No, but I get the impact that he like introduced them way back when, and there's like he's a good guy for you. He'll treat you right, and she's like, well, Daddy, that's maybe right.
So then, okay, fair enough. So then my second point is, she really feels like a placeholder to me. So Eddie Murphy's character, Akeem, is very, very strong. Like, he's got a lot going on. He's got motivation. He's got history. He's got like, it's the interesting thing of having everything and not having a struggle. And so needing something in your life that matters, feeling like you worked for something. It makes perfect sense. he wants to have a woman who engages him, arouses his mind as well as his loins, I think is its, and that's a really interesting trait. And so he gets to New York, he meets a horror show of a carousel of awful women in the club, and then the first woman he sees who stands up and kind of speaks clearly on a kind of worthwhile topic, he's like, this is the woman for me. And then she doesn't really have a lot going for her after that point. Like, she other than not being like those other women, she doesn't really have a personality. She doesn't really have,
I mean, that's where it does kind of default to type of male protagonist finds
I think
love in
that's probably just a natural outcome of Eddie Murphy trying to write a female character. I mean, this is Eddie Murphy film. It's about him. The main character is him.
He didn't write the script though.
The story was him. John Landis and someone else wrote the script.
It's the vehicle for him, and American 80s romantic comedies were never. There's very rare that the women parts are written particularly well.
And that's why I said I think I'm quite happy with it being 2 hours, because if it had been shorter, I feel that us getting to know Lisa, that would have been
the first thing to go.
Yeah, that would have been curtailed. Because I think we do get a bit of, as we get to see why Eric LaSalle's character is a twat, and that's why she would want to move away from him. I'm always, and this is generally like a film thing where people fall in love. People tend to fall in love, apart from like when Harry Met Sally. People tend to fall in love very quickly, and it's a whirlwind thing. And that's the thing that I can kind of find the hardest thing. But
it has to happen like that in films, or they'd be like 8 hours long.
I'd say that's the.
It's no before sunset and after sunset, which we're not coming to this film expecting that.
Yeah. I'd say that's the one aspect of the film that really shows its age compared to everything. And don't get me wrong, I mean, this film could have been a total car crash, from what I expected to see after 30 years or so.
You just thought 80s film, male protagonist. I remember there being boobs in it. Okay. Yeah. But I think there was a couple of things that, just to touch on that point, that I don't think would happen or be, like I said, more woke atmosphere. And the first thing is that when Eddie's been introduced to his bride and he doesn't know who it is, and there's a large woman that comes to front and everyone's like, that was like, dude, the fat shaming doesn't happen. That wouldn't happen. That
was very much a shock value sort of visual joke for
So that's, I think,
that body type's quite popular now. So,
well, it's not. That's beside the point. It was the fact they were horrified by it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
I think that's the main thing.
And also a little bit, it was an older woman as well, wasn't it?
I think it's more the size of her.
Yeah, a bit of both.
Yeah.
The other thing as well, I suppose I'm a little bit of a Republican when it comes to the royals, and it's quite nice that he's got like £1 million to spend on earrings and he's got money to throw away and stuff. But every time there was one of these, I know it's absolutely ridiculous to pick a film of this era apart like this, and I realise the absurdity of it. But every time he was profligate with his wealth, I just thought, like, how many, where was all that money coming from in this like poor African country of Zamunda, where one small family basically just hoard the entire wealth so that a guy can just like throw $1 million earrings at a woman in.
We can talk about how the super wealthy in Nigeria after this podcast get their money, but that's not for here and now. Okay, let's go to the scores for Coming to America.
I'm Sam Clements, host of the 90 Minutes or Less Film Festival, another podcast in the Stripped Media family, a podcast that celebrates movies under 90 minutes long. Each episode, I'm joined by a special guest who selects a movie to join our prestigious lineup. Past guests have come from the worlds of film, television, music, food, comedy, and podcasting. Search for us now on the app you're currently listening to this podcast, or join us at 90minfilmfest.com.
welcome to our spreadsheet of dreams. All of our scores are out of 5. You may have decimal places if you wish, and we'll start with you, Rich, with your recommendability, please.
For this film, I'm going to be very honest. I watched this film in preparation for this podcast a few days ago, and my younger brother, who is in his mid-20s, had never seen this film.
Right.
And I was staying at their house for the weekend, and I said, right, I've got to watch Coming to America again, put it on. And he watched it and he loved it. And I think that is a 5. I will sit down and defend this film above almost any other to the death, purely for how funny it is. I know there are flaws with it. I know it's not perfect. I love it, and I think there's enough there for pretty much anyone. 5.
Ben?
I realised I was just picking some really pernickety points there, but I think Rich is pretty right. Yeah, it's an enjoyable film. It's better than I remember. It's better than I expected, and I think you could do a lot worse for an enjoyable rom-com style 80s comedy. So I'll go with a 4, I think.
Helen?
Yeah, so as we've already mentioned, an all-black cast is, still trying to get films like that made now. To be able to do this in the 80s and, be that successful is amazing. And it's aged reasonably well. I didn't remember it being this long, though. And I felt that once they kind of meet, after that point, it's a little bit slow and it could have been wrapped up a little bit tighter, which is a shame because the bits that are funny and the really, really good bits are really funny. So for me, I would like to maybe see this magical editor's cut with a little bit shorter to keep it a bit punchier. And I think the first half is funnier than kind of the middle bit, and then it kind of picks up at the end. So I'm going to go for 3.5 on this one.
Just to follow up on what Helen is saying now, I think looking back now, it just kind of occurs to me that pretty much all the interesting funny bits are broadly between Eddie Murphy and Arsenio Hall, and it would have been nicer if it had more of a Harry Met Sally. I know that was 10 years later or whatever, but if there was more character moments and more humour between Lisa and Eddie Murphy, that would have healed that gap. That would have made the film whole, I think.
I'm going 4.75 here. They will take a few people wouldn't like the swearing. But apart from that, I'm like, good. If you haven't seen it, I'm glad your brother, who hadn't seen it before, in this day and age, really, really took to it and enjoyed that. It does give me kind of heart, and it does go to show when a film is well made and comes from a good place, even though there were a few flaws in it as seen now, it's still kind of, it does work. So,
holds up.
Yeah. Repeat viewing score, Rich?
I think with this film, it does have boy meets girl, boy falls in love with girl. There is the slight peril where she finds out that he's the prince and suddenly isn't quite so sure because of the very slight deception, because she thought he was a goat herder, because that's what he told her. So from that point of view, I think it loses a little bit of a repeat viewing because you know how it's going to end. There isn't anything vastly different from a formula there. I'd give it a 4. Purely, I think that's what would lose it a higher mark. But I think there's enough in there, the jokes, and especially if you come back to it a little bit later on, there are so many parallels with The Lion King because of the parents.
Yeah.
And also
Aladdin even.
Well, that too. And something my brother mentioned was, James Earl Jones brings a fair bit of Darth Vader to this as well. And some of his lines could be straight out of a Star Wars movie.
Because I was thinking when we talk about the lineup, James Earl Jones was one of the biggest actors on the planet at this point. Many people, but one of the people you actually didn't see that much on screen, or not known for what he looks like on screen.
Interestingly, he plays a very different character in Soul Man, where he's a really furiously strict and rigorous law professor in Harvard University, and that was interesting because that's for anyone who doesn't know, just look at the synopsis and you'll realise why that's an uncomfortable film. But he put himself in there as well.
Repeat viewing score, Ben?
Probably 3. I think. This wouldn't be a film I'd go out of my way to watch again, but I could envision a few years from now having a hungover Sunday afternoon.
You got your McDowell's and think, let's go well with this McDowell's.
Yeah, let's get some second-rate burgers and just kind of try and like recover.
Soul glowing.
Yeah, my hair shiny. What's left of it. Yeah, I could, like, I don't know, if it came around and I had, didn't have too much to do and I was a bit, in the mood for a bit of comedy, I'd let it play, I think. Helen?
Yeah, I'm going to go for a 3 as well. I'm not going to rush out and watch it again this week, but when you suggested it, I was like, yeah, I think I'm ready to watch this again. And yeah, I don't know how many times I've seen it, loads.
For me, I've definitely watched it a gazillion times, and like I said, we did have that recorded from TV version, which don't know whether the original source. Version. Yeah, the PG-fied version. Yeah, and I'm glad it's on Netflix again, and it was only a matter of time before I would have seen it had you not recommended it, and I hope it's on Netflix in a couple of years' time because I will watch it again. So I'm going to go for 4.2 because I watched it loads, and I still hope to keep on watching it for quite regularly for the foreseeable future. And hopefully, coming to America, the sequel will be worth it.
We'll see if that goes straight to Netflix.
Right, small screen score. Has anyone actually seen this in the cinema?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Tell us about it.
So 2 or 3 years ago, there was a comedy group of people. It was mostly around African-American comedy, and they presented this at the BFI as part of a series of movies that they were doing. And they also had a Skype interview with John Landis at the end. And watching this in a full cinema where a lot of the people in the cinema were black, it made, I think, because a lot of the humour, I mean, some of it would be aimed, but some of it is so universal. There isn't that issue around, we said about it's an all-black cast, but it really isn't massively relevant. It's not a massive part of this plot. And it was an incredible experience watching it with a couple of hundred people who were laughing at almost all of it. And again, that might actually detract from watching it on the small screen because I have that experience of watching it in a full cinema. But watching it on Netflix on a Saturday night with a couple of beers and a takeaway was still pretty good. With watching it, in my case, with someone who hadn't seen it before. Yeah. I'll give it a 4.5 because, again, I'll watch it again. No matter how long it's on Netflix, I will watch it again. I've got it on DVD, but I have seen it on a big screen, which was incredible. Ben?
Yeah, I would imagine, certainly a comedy like this, something quite charismatic and bombastic, I imagine the audience factor would be enormous. And it would be nice to see it, as we always say, at the Prince Charles.
As part of an Eddie Murphy season.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine that even though I didn't really laugh this time round and I found it a little bit baggy, I think watching it with a packed screen of semi-drunk punters,
everyone who knows the joke's coming and they know what's coming on.
It would lend it another dimension. So but that said, I don't. The audience factor aside, I don't think it really loses much on a small screen. It doesn't have, I suppose, the opening scenes with all the stuff in the palace are really colourful, and all the Afro dance and all that stuff. I think would be nicer on the big screen. But yeah, 3.5.
Helen.
So yeah, I'm going to go 4.5. Sort of echoing what you said, Rich. That I mean, I've only ever seen it on a small screen, but the idea of watching it at least in company would be like something I think would be quite good fun. So if you have not seen it, then definitely watch it on Netflix because it's there. But if there's a chance for you to watch it on the big screen, then
or get some friends.
Watch it with some friends.
I'm going to go 4.5 as well. I think I would really like to watch it in the Prince Charles. Ben, you've seen, so your favourite film, Ben, is Big Lebowski, or at least what your stock answer is Big Lebowski. You say you've seen it at Prince Charles. What was that like for you watching it with people who knew everything about it versus your standard kind of watching it alone?
Yeah, tremendous. Yeah. And it's, I think there's certain cult films just deserve to be seen, and it's a communal experience. It's almost, I'm not gonna quite say religious, but it's a shared group experience of other like-minded fans, and any if you do have a favorite film and you get the chance to see it in a cinema with an audience and you've never done that before, whatever that film is, go do it.
Yeah. So engagement score, Rich.
I was so engaged with this film. I just can't take my eyes off it. There's certain parts of it I love more. I mean, whenever I talk about the film on social media, it always seems to come back to something about the barbershop quartet, the barbershop scene. But there are parts of it, and there is quite a universal story that boiled down to it. It's quite easy to get on board with, and most of it is hilarious. And I just I can't praise this film enough. I love it. Can I go for another 5?
You can do, of course.
Sure, yeah, it's your scores.
Ben.
Like I say, he's magnetic on screen, Eddie Murphy, and all the character moments with him and Arsenio Hall and the stuff when he's playing other people is magnetic. You just can't look away. The stuff with Lisa and her dad, I found a bit dry and a bit baggy, and so I'll go with a 4.
Helen.
So a little bit low for me, 3.5. It did feel longer than I remembered it being, so maybe I did watch like an edited version that had just been made shorter. And because I've seen it so many times, I didn't feel that I was completely glued to it. But it's still enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm going 4.5. I think it must have been like 10 years since I watched it last. So I was really looking forward to it. And I was like, sat down, had the popcorn and stuff ready, watching it, and it had an absolute blast with it. And I knew everything that was coming up, but I was excited for things that were coming up. I was excited to see Samuel L. Jackson say "Forget You," or it's always going to be "Forget You" for me, and that's brilliant. 4.5.
So on that, so when he arrives and everyone says "fuck you" and everything, was that still in it, or was that not in it?
I don't remember that, but it was I'm not sure how they cut around that side of things, but it was the confrontation of "fuck you" tends to "forget you," because that's directly at the camera, at Arsenio and Eddie, and such a visceral way, and it was his mouth on the moving at the same time.
And the reason you and your brother thought it was so hilarious is because he was quite obviously not saying that.
No, because we thought he was saying "forget you," and we thought that's such an odd thing to say. So we would go around saying "forget you" to people at like 7 and 8 years old. This is why you don't obviously have swearing on. Don't show swearing to kids, because they'll just repeat stuff. And then when we found out it wasn't "forget you" and it was actually "fuck you," we were like, "Oh right,
it makes more sense."
That makes more sense.
I'd just love to.
There's one thing that doesn't make sense about that scene, because right afterwards, you would imagine that I think the father says, "Oh, he's knocked this place over like 3 or 4 times. Yeah. He's like shooting holes out of the ceiling with a shotgun." I mean, this is a seriously violent criminal, and gets tripped over. He doesn't actually get smashed in the face, which was a bit disappointing, but he gets kind of like taken out by Eddie Murphy and his bow staff skills.
Yeah.
And then afterwards he's sitting outside and the dad's like, "Oh, I don't think we'll be seeing him again anytime soon." And I'm like, well, I'd like to think he'd been arrested at the very least. Do you think?
Well, he would have been arrested. That's yeah.
But it sort of sounded to me like, "Oh yeah, you beat him up good. He won't be coming back." And,
no, I assumed he was arrested and he was carted off, and he maybe would think twice about upon release.
It'll be out in 28 days for good behaviour.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, on that subject, I think the part you were saying at the beginning where they land and they go to the barber shop, and I think at one point Eddie Murphy's barber says, "Fuck you, fuck you, fuck you, who's next?"
Yeah.
I don't remember him saying "forget you, forget you, forget you."
No, I think they would have just edited around that.
Yeah, that'd just be
probably chopped the whole scene
in.
Yeah,
exactly. Chop bits out for seeing. But when Samuel L. Jackson's pointing pretty much towards the camera,
they would do that. You know, The Goonies, for instance. The first time I saw the opening minutes of The Goonies was when I got it on Blu-ray, and it was horrifying. And I saw that film 20 or 30 times as a child, and I never realised it had that really, really terrifying beginning.
Well, maybe I don't know. Goonies is a film that I would have just seen recorded from TV, and it was there, and I just played it again. I don't think I've ever seen it on DVD.
And even then, they still show that on terrestrial TV now at sort of 4 o'clock in the afternoon.
They definitely didn't. They definitely didn't in the 80s.
And that gives a score.
Yeah, sorry, that gives us an overall score of 4.019063. It's in the 4s.
Yeah, it's pretty high.
Yeah. So as we always do before going to record, we go to Twitter. And in this case, we're reviewing Coming to America with Top Film Tip and Betamax Pod. So, guys, if you are following us on Twitter, do look out for these. Before we record, we'll put one of these things out to do comment, asking for a short review, and we go on. So, Rich, do you want to give us that review?
So this was from Shaken Not Nerd. They describe it as fun, entertaining, and still holds up. A must-watch classic, #sexy chocolate, #the Big Mick. And they give it 4 out of 5.
Yeah, fantastic. So, guys, can you sign off by telling us where we can find you online and tell us about anything you're up to that our listeners might want to follow you on?
I do the Betamax Video Club podcast, 80s films, everything from Rocky IV, James Bond to the Ewok movies. I haven't touched Coming to America yet because I need to find the perfect vehicle for that. I'm thinking I might do a live sort of running commentary of that one with my friend who I saw that at the cinema with. But that's available in all good and bad podcasts.
So does that mean you've got some films that you've held in such high esteem that you're not going to talk about them on your show until this?
I mean, I've done dozens of episodes so far, and I didn't want to sort of go too soon. And I haven't done, what you'd think of the big 80s classics. I haven't done sort of Top Gun or Ghostbusters or Back to the Future yet because, we need a bit of a back catalogue.
Well, Top Gun, another latent sequel. Ghostbusters, another latent sequel. It's going to be interesting to see how these ones play out.
There's a theme.
Have you considered sourcing an old Betamax and some old tapes and watching them in the original?
Weirdly, I have some tapes that I've got off eBay. My prized possession is a Betamax tape of Superman 4.
Filmed in Milton Keynes, I believe.
Of course, yeah. I don't have a Betamax player at this point. I do have a VHS that I borrowed off a neighbour and have been watching some. I've still got the original Star Wars trilogy sort of pre-editing, messing around.
I watched some VHS a little while ago, and I think it might have been Clockwork Orange or something Kubricky, and it just remember it sounded like the audio had been recorded down a drain pipe, and you don't realise how lucky we are.
It's like when I had my old car up until like a year ago up in Manchester
player in it.
with a cassette player, and I just put my favourite mixtape that I made when I was like 15, and it sounds awful.
Oh, yeah.
And it just sounds awful, and I just think, what? We had to suffer through a lot, guys, to get here. Obviously, it's not that bad, but it's still, VHS, Betamax, that kind of format was just terrible recreations.
Yeah.
But it's always what you had, media, and it was better than not having anything at all.
Absolutely.
So it makes cinema all that more special.
Yeah.
Ben.
Hi guys. My name is Ben, and if you are interested in films on TV or just finding out films that you might be of interest to you, you can follow my film content on Twitter @TopFilmTip. If you have some bizarre interest in my personal life, I'm on Instagram as Seth Rogen Josh. And if you have any interest in science fiction, I wrote a young adult neuroscience fiction novel called Winner Winner, and you can find out all about it on winnerwinnernovel.com.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys.
Thanks so much for coming on.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Enjoyed this episode of Flixwatcher podcast? Why not leave us a 5-star review on iTunes? You can also follow us @FlixWatcherPod on Twitter, and we're @FlixWatcher on Instagram. Thanks as always to the mighty people for their mighty tunes, and Ben from Rockwood Audio for his awesome editing skills. If you're looking to get your podcast edited as sweet as this, get in touch with Ben, and that's Rockwood, ROKK Wood Audio. Tell them Flixwatcher sent you.
You just heard a Stripped Media production.